A financial advisor discovers massive fraud and schedules a meeting with the Attorney General. The next morning his coffee pot is still warm, his newspaper lies open, but he has vanished. For 26 years the men who ordered his murder walked free, protected by deleted files and buried secrets. This is the story of how archived emails forgotten in a storage server finally exposed a conspiracy that turned a small-town scandal into cold-blooded murder. If you believe that digital evidence never truly dies, subscribe now because this channel proves that the truth waits in places killers forget to erase. This is the case of Gerald Thompson, the man who knew too much about Wall Street fraud and paid with his life. Friday, March 13, 1998. Cooperstown, New York. Population 2,100. The kind of small town where everyone knew when someone bought a new car or stayed out past midnight. Gerald Thompson was not the kind of man who stayed out past midnight. The call came into the Cooperstown Police Department at 8:42 that morning. Patricia Thompson's voice was steady at first, almost apologetic for bothering them. Her husband Gerald had not come home the night before. No, they had not argued. No, this was not like him. He was supposed to chair the Budget Committee meeting at 7:30. He never missed those meetings. Never. Officer Dennis Walsh took the call. He had known Gerald for 6 years. They were not friends exactly, but they exchanged pleasantries at the post office, discussed interest rates at the barber shop. Gerald was 42 years old, methodical to the point of obsession. The kind of man who wore the same style of navy blue suit every day and ate tuna fish sandwiches for lunch every Wednesday without fail. He worked at Morrison & Associates, a modest financial consulting firm housed in a converted Victorian on Main Street. 3 employees total. Gerald handled the local clients, small business owners and retirees who trusted him with their life savings. Walsh drove to the Thompson residence on Elm Street, a white clapboard house with black shutters and a perfectly maintained front lawn even in winter. Patricia met him at the door. She was 39. A part-time librarian at the public library. Her hands were shaking as she held a mug of tea she had not touched. The house felt wrong in a way Walsh could not immediately articulate. Everything was in its place, too much in its place. Gerald's briefcase sat by the front door where he always left it. His winter coat hung on the third hook from the left in the hallway closet. But the coffee pot in the kitchen was still plugged in. The carafe containing maybe 2 cups of coffee had been sitting there long enough to develop a film on top. The newspaper lay on the kitchen table, folded open to an article about technology stocks. Gerald's reading glasses caught the weak morning light coming through the window. Patricia told Walsh that Gerald had been home for dinner Thursday night. Pot roast. They had watched Seinfeld together at 9. Their 2 children were upstairs doing homework. Melissa was 16, a junior at Cooperstown High School. Robert was 14, freshman year, quiet kid who played clarinet in the school band. Normal evening. Gerald had mentioned he needed to review some client files before the morning meeting. He had gone into his home office around 10:15. Patricia had gone to bed around 11, assuming he would follow soon after, like he always did. But when she woke at 6:30 Friday morning, his side of the bed was still made. She had found the coffee pot on, the newspaper out, the briefcase by the door. His car was gone. Walsh radioed for backup and began making calls. By noon, they had located Gerald's car in the parking lot behind Morrison & Associates. Dark blue Honda Accord, 1996 model, parked in his usual spot. The doors were locked. When they opened it with Patricia's spare key, they found nothing disturbed. No signs of struggle. The keys were in the ignition. Gerald David Thompson had simply disappeared. Martin Coldwell, the senior partner at Morrison & Associates, had hired Gerald 15 years earlier. Coldwell was 63 now, a man who had started the firm in 1971 after leaving a larger practice in Albany. He told investigators that Gerald was the most reliable employee he had ever had. Never sick. Never distracted. Gerald handled approximately 45 client accounts, mostly local business owners and retirees. His specialty was conservative investment strategies, the kind that would not make anyone rich, but would not lose their savings either. But in the months leading up to his disappearance, something had shifted. Coldwell mentioned it almost as an afterthought during his initial interview with police. Gerald had become increasingly vocal about what he called the technology bubble. He had been reading everything he could find about internet companies, these startups with no profits but astronomical stock prices. He had started advising his clients to pull back from tech investments. Some had listened, many had not. Patricia confirmed this obsession when Walsh interviewed her more thoroughly that Friday afternoon. Gerald had been staying up late, reading financial journals and printing articles off their home computer. They had gotten America Online the previous year, and Gerald spent hours reading message boards about the stock market. He had filled a filing cabinet in his home office with research. Their son Robert told Walsh that his father had seemed worried lately. Not scared exactly, but preoccupied. He had started locking his home office door, something he had never done before. 2 weeks ago, Robert had heard his father on the phone late at night, voice raised, saying something about people not understanding the consequences. Melissa, the daughter, was more forthcoming. She told Walsh that her father had changed after Christmas. He had attended the town council meeting in January and given a presentation about municipal investment strategy. He had warned them against putting pension funds into certain technology stocks. Some council members had laughed. One had called him old-fashioned. Her father had come home that night and sat in his office until 3 in the morning. The church had been another constant in Gerald's life. Cooperstown Presbyterian, a white building with a modest steeple on Chestnut Street. Reverend Philip Brennan, Patricia's uncle, had known Gerald for 20 years. He told investigators that Gerald had seemed distracted during services. 2 Sundays before his disappearance, Gerald had asked to speak with Reverend Brennan privately. They had sat in the small office behind the sanctuary. Gerald had asked questions about moral obligations, about what a person should do if they knew something that could hurt people, but staying silent might hurt even more people. Brennan had tried to get specifics, but Gerald had said he was speaking hypothetically, just working through some ethical scenarios for a client. But his hands had been shaking when he said it. By Monday, March 16, 3 days after Gerald disappeared, investigators executed a search warrant on his home office. What they found painted a picture of a man who had become increasingly concerned, perhaps obsessed, with what he saw as an approaching financial catastrophe. Email printouts showed correspondence with other financial analysts, some at major firms in New York City and Boston. Gerald had been reaching out to anyone who would listen, sharing his research, asking if others saw the same warning signs he did. Most responses were dismissive or condescending. But it was the handwritten journal entries that revealed the depth of Gerald's turmoil. He had kept a personal diary, separate from his professional ledger, hidden in a locked drawer of his desk. Patricia had not known it existed. The final entry was dated March 11, 1998, 1 day before his disappearance. I have made my decision. Monday morning I am driving to Albany to meet with someone at the state attorney general's office. Caldwell does not know. Patricia does not know. I have hidden copies of everything in a place no one will think to look. If something happens to me, the truth still exists. Gerald Thompson had stood before the Cooperstown Business Association on the evening of February 11, 1998, in the conference room above the First National Bank, and told 23 local business owners that they were about to lose everything if they did not listen to him. Outside, snow fell in thick curtains. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile glow over folding tables arranged in a U-shape. Gerald had prepared a presentation, printed slides on his home inkjet printer, and arranged them on an overhead projector. The first slide showed a graph tracking technology stock prices over the previous 3 years. The line climbed at an angle that defied gravity. Companies with no revenue, no profits, stock prices in the hundreds of dollars per share, based on nothing but potential and hope. Amazon.com had never turned a profit but was valued at $6 billion. Yahoo had gone public 18 months earlier and made millionaires overnight. Everyone wanted in. Everyone except Gerald Thompson. He clicked through his slides methodically, his voice steady but insistent. These valuations made no sense, he told them. The fundamentals were not there. price-to-earnings ratios that would have been laughable 5 years ago were now considered normal. People were taking out second mortgages to buy stocks in companies that sold pet food over the internet. It was tulip mania all over again, he said, referencing the Dutch financial collapse of 1637. Most of the room stared at him blankly. Officer Dennis Walsh had obtained the minutes from that meeting during his investigation. Sarah Brennan, Patricia's cousin and secretary of the Business Association, had typed them up 3 days later. The minutes recorded that Gerald had recommended his clients begin divesting from technology stocks immediately. He had predicted a significant correction, possibly a crash, before the year 2000. Several members had challenged him. Thomas Morrison, who owned the hardware store and had made $40,000 in 6 months on internet stocks, had called Gerald's analysis overly cautious. Rita Hughes, the real estate agent who had put her retirement savings into tech mutual funds, had suggested Gerald was simply behind the times. The new economy operated on different rules, she had said. Gerald had closed his briefcase and left the meeting 20 minutes early. But it was the individual client meetings that revealed the depth of Gerald's concern. Martha Keller, 73 years old, widow of the former school superintendent, met with Gerald on February 24. She had saved religiously her entire life, accumulated $460,000 in investments, enough to live comfortably for her remaining years. Gerald had managed her portfolio for 12 years. Conservative strategy, mostly bonds and blue-chip stocks. Safe in January, her grandson had convinced her to move 30% of her holdings into technology funds. By February, that $140,000 had grown to $190,000. She had come into Gerald's office excited, talking about moving even more money into tech stocks. Martha told investigators that Gerald had practically begged her not to. He had shown her his research, pages and pages of analysis about unsustainable valuations and inevitable corrections. He had used words like catastrophic and devastating. She had never seen him so animated, so desperate to make someone understand. But the numbers did not lie, she told him. She was making money hand over fist. Was not that what investing was about? Gerald had leaned forward across his desk, she remembered, his reading glasses sliding down his nose, and said something that had stuck with her ever since. Martha, when this falls apart, it is not just going to hurt the people who invested. It is going to hurt the people who enabled it. By early March, Gerald had convinced only 6 of his 45 clients to reduce their technology exposure. The rest either ignored his advice or, in 3 cases, moved their accounts to other advisors who were more optimistic about the new economy. Martin Coldwell had pulled Gerald aside on March 9th, 4 days before the disappearance, and told him to stop scaring the clients. The firm could not afford to lose business because Gerald was being paranoid. Gerald had responded that the firm could not afford not to protect their clients. The conversation had ended badly. Coldwell admitted Gerald had said something strange as he left the office that afternoon. You will understand when the bodies start piling up. But what Gerald had discovered was not just bad investment advice. It was fraud. On March 8, 1998, Gerald had met with someone who might be able to help. He had written in his journal that he could not write details there. But if he was right about what he suspected, this was bigger than bad investment advice. This was fraud, systematic, organized fraud. March 10th, second meeting. Gerald wrote that his suspicions had been confirmed. He had documentation now. Copies of correspondence that should never have existed. He did not know what to do with this information. Going to the authorities meant destroying lives, possibly including his own. But doing nothing meant being complicit. What Gerald had found were fee-sharing agreements between Morrison and Associates and a hedge fund called APX Capital Management. Agreements that were never disclosed to clients. Martin Coldwell had been steering clients into high-risk technology investments not because they were good investments, but because APX paid him kickback fees for every referral. The more money clients invested, the more Coldwell earned. Whether clients made money or lost everything was irrelevant to the arrangement. Gerald had discovered contracts going back 5 years, hundreds of clients, millions of dollars in undisclosed fees. It was securities fraud. and Gerald Thompson had the evidence to prove it. On March 9th, Gerald had withdrawn $8,000 in cash from his savings account. The teller at First National remembered the transaction because it was unusual. Gerald typically withdrew money in small amounts. $8,000 in $100 bills was out of character. When the teller had asked if everything was all right, Gerald had smiled tightly and said he was making a purchase. Nothing to worry about. He had put the cash in his briefcase and left. Patricia had not known about the withdrawal until Walsh showed her the bank statement. She had gone pale, steadied herself against the kitchen counter. Gerald handled their finances, but they discussed major expenses. He would not have taken that much money without telling her. Unless he did not want her to know. Unless he was planning something he could not explain. The Getty station sat at the northern edge of Cooperstown, where Route 20 met County Road 31, a junction that marked the boundary between town and farmland. It was one of those places that existed more out of necessity than ambition. A single island of pumps under flickering lights, a small convenience store with barred windows, and a mechanic's bay that only opened on weekdays. On Sunday afternoon, March 15th, Officer Dennis Walsh pulled into that lot for the third time in as many days. Because a phone call had just changed everything they thought they knew about Gerald Thompson's disappearance. The call had come from Kenneth Fraser, night shift attendant at the Getty station. Fraser was 24 years old, community college dropout, living in his grandmother's basement and working 11 to 7, Thursday through Monday. He had been off since Friday morning when Gerald disappeared. Had not heard about the missing person case until his girlfriend mentioned it Sunday afternoon while they were watching television. She had recognized Gerald's photo from the news broadcast, said he looked familiar. Fraser had frozen with a beer halfway to his mouth. Because he had seen that man Thursday night. Walsh sat across from Fraser in the cramped office behind the convenience store counter, a windowless room that smelled of stale coffee and motor oil. Fraser was nervous, picking at the label on his Pepsi can, leg bouncing under the table. He told Walsh that Thursday night had been slow, maybe 6 customers between 11 and midnight. He remembered Gerald Thompson because the man had seemed wrong somehow. Agitated in a way that did not match his neat suit and careful manner. Gerald had pulled up to pump 3 at 11:15, Fraser said maybe 11:20. Fraser had been restocking cigarettes behind the counter when he glanced out and saw the Honda Accord under the lights. Gerald had paid for gas with cash, $20, then came inside and bought a large coffee, even though the pot had been sitting there since 9. He had added 4 sugars, which Fraser noticed because most people who drank gas station coffee that late were truckers who took it black. Gerald had stood at the condiment counter for maybe 2 minutes, just stirring his coffee and staring at nothing. Then he had asked Fraser if the payphone outside still worked. The detail hit Walsh like cold water. There was a payphone mounted on the exterior wall of the station, next to the air pump. Fraser confirmed it was functional. Said people used it occasionally when their cell batteries died or they did not want calls showing up on their phone bills. Gerald had made a call, Fraser remembered, standing outside in the March cold without his coat, just his suit jacket, talking for maybe 3 or 4 minutes. Fraser could not hear what was said through the glass, but he could see Gerald's body language. The man had been looking over his shoulder constantly, scanning the parking lot, the road, the darkness beyond the station lights. When Gerald came back inside, he had bought a pack of Marlboro Reds, even though Fraser was certain the man did not smoke because his fingers were clean, and he handled the pack awkwardly, like he did not know what to do with it. Fraser had asked if he needed matches. Gerald had said no, then changed his mind and took a book of matches anyway. He had paid with exact change, $3.67, counting it out slowly on the counter. Then Gerald had asked Fraser a question that seemed strange at the time and haunting in retrospect. If someone needed to disappear for a while, where would they go around here? Fraser had thought it was a joke maybe, or a weird way of asking for motel recommendations. He had suggested the Quality Inn off Route 28, about 15 miles west. Gerald had nodded but had not seemed satisfied with the answer. He had picked up his cigarettes and matches and coffee, and walked out to his car. Fraser had watched through the window as Gerald sat in the driver's seat for several minutes, not starting the engine, just sitting there drinking the coffee. Then Gerald had gotten out of the car, locked it, and walked north on County Road 31. Into the darkness. Walsh felt his pulse quicken. He walked. You are sure? He walked away from his car. Fraser nodded emphatically. I thought it was weird as hell. Who leaves their car at a gas station at 11:30 at night and just walks into nothing? I almost went after him to ask if he needed help, but we had had a robbery attempt last year, and I am not supposed to leave the store unattended. I figured maybe his house was nearby or someone was picking him up. But Gerald's house was 4 miles south, in the opposite direction, and County Road 31 led into rural farmland. Scattered houses separated by acres of winter fields and stretches of state forest. Walsh obtained the security camera footage from the station that same afternoon. The system was old, recording to VHS tapes that were reused every week. Thursday's tape was still in the machine because Fraser had not worked Friday or Saturday to change it. The footage was grainy, black and white, timestamps in the corner showing Thursday, March 12, 1998. Walsh watched the tape 3 times. There was Gerald at 11:17, pulling up to pump 3. There he was 2 minutes later, walking into the store, his face partially visible through the window. The camera angle did not capture the payphone, but Walsh could see Gerald exit the store at 11:23, walk out of frame to the right where the phone was located, then return to frame 4 minutes later. Gerald's body language matched Fraser's description: tense shoulders, frequent glances around the lot, movements that suggested a man deeply uncomfortable with his surroundings. At 11:31, Gerald locked his car and walked north on County Road 31. The camera captured him for maybe 10 seconds before he disappeared into darkness beyond the reach of the station lights. Gerald Thompson walked away from his car carrying nothing but a pack of cigarettes, a book of matches, and a cup of gas station coffee. He was never seen alive again. By Monday morning, March 16, investigators had expanded their search along County Road 31. Tracking dogs picked up Gerald's scent from the gas station and followed it north for approximately half a mile, before losing the trail near a dirt access road that led into state forest. The area was remote, dense trees, no streetlights, no houses within a mile. In March, with snow still on the ground and temperatures dropping into the 20s at night, it was not a place anyone would choose to walk without a vehicle. Unless they were meeting someone. Unless they believed they had no other choice. The phone records told the rest of the story, though investigators would not find them until 25 years later. The payphone at the Getty station had received an incoming call at 11:04 on the night of March 12. The call had originated from a cell phone registered to Martin Coldwell's business account. Duration 6 minutes and 43 seconds. Coldwell had called Gerald. Had told him something that made Gerald drive to that gas station and wait. Had arranged for someone to meet him there, someone who would make sure Gerald Thompson never made it to the Attorney General's office on Monday morning. 25 years passed. Gerald Thompson's case file sat in the Cooperstown Police Department evidence room, box after box of reports and photographs and witness statements that no one looked at anymore. Chief McLeod retired in 2008. Officer Dennis Walsh left law enforcement in 2003, burned out from too many questions and not enough answers. Patricia Thompson died in 2015 at age 66. The official cause was a heart attack, but her daughter Melissa told Robert at the funeral that their mother had died of a broken heart 17 years earlier. Her body had just taken a while to catch up. Melissa became a lawyer, specializing in securities fraud prosecution. Robert became an accountant. Both built careers on the foundation of their father's disappearance, searching for answers in different ways. The break came from an investigation that had nothing to do with Gerald Thompson. In August of 2023, FBI agents from the Albany field office were conducting a fraud investigation into a hedge fund called Apex Capital Management. The fund had collapsed in 2022. Losing $700 million of investor money. The FBI suspected the collapse was not accidental but rather the result of systematic fraud stretching back decades. They had obtained warrants to seize all electronic records, which led them to a climate-controlled storage facility in Latham, New York, where Apex had stored backup servers dating to the 1990s. Special Agent Jennifer Hamilton was 34 years old, 12 years with the FBI. Specialized in financial crimes and digital forensics, she had been assigned to comb through archived email servers that APX had maintained even after upgrading to newer systems. Most of the data was routine, client correspondence, internal memos, vacation requests, but on August 23, 2023, Hamilton found something that made her stop scrolling and read more carefully. The emails dated from March of 1998. They had been sent between two addresses, one belonging to Martin Coldwell at Morrison & Associates in Cooperstown, and another belonging to a man named Richard Boyle, who had been a senior partner at Apex Capital in 1998. Hamilton almost skipped past them because they seemed to be discussing a client issue. But then she noticed the name Gerald Thompson in the subject line, and the tone of the correspondence made her instincts flare. The first email was dated March 9, 1998, sent from Coldwell to Boyle at 9:15 in the evening. "We have a problem. Thompson has been reviewing client accounts and asking questions about the referral arrangements. He found the documentation we thought was destroyed. I tried to convince him this is standard industry practice, but he is talking about taking it to regulators. He mentioned the Attorney General's office. We need to discuss this in person immediately." Boyle's response came 20 minutes later. "How much does he actually know? Does he have copies of the agreements?" Coldwell replied, "He has everything. The fee-sharing contracts, the kickback schedules, the client lists. He made copies before I knew what he was looking at. He says what we are doing is illegal, that we are steering clients into high-risk investments so we can collect referral fees regardless of whether the clients make money. He called it fraud." Hamilton sat back in her chair, the archived emails glowing on her screen. She had been with the FBI long enough to recognize the significance of what she was reading. Fee-sharing and kickback arrangements were not necessarily illegal if properly disclosed. But hiding them from clients absolutely was. If Coldwell and Boyle had been steering clients into risky investments to collect fees without disclosure, that was securities fraud. And if Gerald Thompson had discovered this arrangement and threatened to report it, that gave Coldwell a powerful motive to silence him. She kept reading. The email chain continued over the next 2 days, increasingly frantic in tone. March 10th. Met with Thompson this afternoon. He is determined to go forward. Says he has a moral obligation to protect the clients even if it costs him his career. I told him we could work something out, a settlement perhaps, but he refused. He scheduled a meeting with someone at the AG's office for Monday the 16th. March 11th. This is going to destroy both our firms and put us in prison. Thompson has evidence of hundreds of inappropriate referrals going back 5 years. We need to stop this. I know someone who might be able to help us resolve this quietly. The final email was dated March 12, 1998, sent from Boyle to Coldwell at 8:43 in the evening. Everything is arranged for tonight. Make sure you are nowhere near Cooperstown. Establish an ally. After tonight, Thompson will not be a problem anymore. Hamilton read that last line 3 times, feeling her pulse accelerate. She immediately flagged the emails and notified her supervisor. Within 2 hours, the Gerald Thompson cold case had been reopened as a federal investigation into murder and securities fraud. The evidence had been sitting in an archive server for 25 years, waiting for someone to find it. The investigation moved with precision. Within 72 hours, the FBI had assembled a task force, secured cooperation from New York State Police, and begun reconstructing events from 25 years earlier. Martin Coldwell was now 88 years old, living in an assisted living facility in Sarasota, Florida. His memory was fractured by age and early-stage dementia. Richard Boyle had died of a heart attack in 2017, but the emails were concrete evidence, and emails led to other records. And records led to people who remembered things they had tried to forget. The breakthrough came from phone records subpoenaed from archives. The payphone at the Getty station had received an incoming call at 11:04 on the night of March 12, 1998. The call had originated from Coldwell's cell phone. Further investigation identified Vincent Moretti, 68 years old now, who had worked as a driver for APX Capital in the late 90s. Phone records showed he had been in contact with Boyle on March 12. When FBI agents knocked on Moretti's door on September 28, 2023, he looked at them with the expression of a man who had been waiting 25 years for this moment. Moretti's lawyer negotiated a deal. Full cooperation in exchange for consideration on sentencing. What Moretti told them filled in the gaps that emails could not. Richard Boyle had called him on March 11, asking if he could handle a sensitive problem. There was a man in Cooperstown who was threatening to destroy their business with fraud allegations. The man needed to be stopped permanently. Boyle offered $50,000 cash. Moretti had driven to Cooperstown on the afternoon of March 12, parked near the Getty station and waited in the darkness. Coldwell had made the call to the payphone, telling Gerald that someone from the Attorney General's office wanted to meet him discreetly, that the person would pick him up at the Getty station at 11:30. Gerald had believed it because he was desperate to believe someone in authority would help him. When Gerald walked away from the station, Moretti had followed in a dark blue Ford van. Less than half a mile from the station, on a stretch of road with no street lights and no houses, Moretti had pulled alongside Gerald and offered him a ride. Gerald had gotten into the van, probably relieved to be out of the cold. Moretti had driven to property owned by a shell company registered to Boyle's cousin, a dirt access road that led into forest. He told Gerald they were taking a shortcut. When they stopped, Moretti had shot Gerald once in the back of the head with a 9mm handgun equipped with a suppressor. Gerald had died instantly. Moretti had dragged the body into the trees, dug a shallow grave and buried Gerald Thompson in soil that would hide him for 25 years. The excavation began on October 15, 2024. The forensic recovery team worked slowly, carefully, documenting everything. They found him 3 feet down, exactly where Vincent Moretti had said he would be. What remained of Gerald Thompson was mostly bones and fragments of clothing. The navy blue suit he had worn to work every day reduced to threads and stains in the soil, but dental records confirmed his identity within 48 hours. Gerald David Thompson, missing since March 12, 1998, had finally come home. Melissa Thompson was 52 years old when the FBI called her with news she had waited 26 years to hear. She sat in her office and cried for the first time since her mother's funeral. Not because her father was dead. She had known that for decades, but because after 26 years of uncertainty, she finally had proof. Vincent Moretti pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. He was sentenced to 25 years to life. Martin Coldwell was arrested at his assisted living facility. Despite his age and diminished capacity, he was determined competent to stand trial. His trial was scheduled for June of 2025. Gerald Thompson was buried on November 9, 2024 in Cooperstown Cemetery, on a hillside overlooking the town he had tried to protect. Patricia Thompson's grave was 30 feet away. The inscription on Gerald's headstone read "Beloved husband and father. He died trying to do what was right." This is why digital evidence never dies. This is why archived emails can speak from storage servers 25 years later. Because fraud leaves trails that killers forget to erase, and truth waits patiently in forgotten databases until someone finally looks. If this case moved you, subscribe to Silent Evidence Reveal, hit the notification bell, share this story. Help us honor people like Gerald Thompson who paid the ultimate price for refusing to stay silent when they witnessed crimes. This was the story of Gerald Thompson, a financial advisor who discovered fraud, and the conspiracy that buried him to protect Wall Street secrets. Remember his name.